And Colin was inside of the circle, and he lit all these candles, and the whole time, again, he's chanting out these Bible verses, and he stands up, and right after all the candles have been lit, suddenly Susan and the journalist noticed that the candles begin to flicker. And it's not windy at all inside the cemetery. Like, they shouldn't be flickering.
Hey y'all, what's up? It's John, Darkwolf92. How's everybody doing today? And I'm here with another video, a video that's on the scary side because, well, we are in that spooky month for Halloween. I don't celebrate Halloween, okay? I'm just going to put that out there. But I do enjoy making these videos because it gives me a reason to, well, check them out. No, seriously though. I think it's a lot of fun to go over these videos and see these scary videos. I share them with y'all, and I am just a little geeked right now. I guess because I'm still excited about coming back to YouTube. I'm really excited about doing this again. I'm still working on the office, as y'all can see. Still trying to get my lighting right. My new oh wow, apologies. My third light should be coming in sometime tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow morning or tomorrow night. And soon I should have my lighting setup complete. Like I said, I'm taking some time to try to get this office right. Because if you see my first two videos, I mentioned how I was bummed out for the longest and didn't do anything and didn't want to do anything. But now I'm stoked and ready to get back in the high gear. So we're gonna go ahead and jump into this first creepy video, and it's by the amazing Mr. Ballen. This man, when he does storytelling, I'm sorry. I've got several that I enjoy, and I've made mention of them before. I may have, and if not, if you don't remember or if you've never seen those videos, it is Mr. Ballin, Mr. Nightmare, Lazy Masquerade, okay, and I love watching Nuke's Top 5 and Slapped Ham, okay, and I've come across a new channel called Bizarre Bug, which we'll be checking out some of his videos, and I this hurts my soul because another person who used to do great creepypasta videos was Corpse Husband. And I mean, I loved watching his videos. His voice, it demanded attention. My mom, when she was still here, she loved watching his videos because she loved hearing his voice. And then when he did his face reveal, the internet, well, it was the internet. And we know, if you know the story behind that, you know. But if you see this, Corpse Husband, I hope you get back on your feet, brother, and get back to doing what you enjoy doing. Don't let stupid people steal your joy. All right. Anyway, before I start preaching, let me go ahead and get into this video. Now, this is gonna be Mr. Ballin, and he's gonna be telling us about the most dangerous cemetery in Europe. Now, the video does caution it's for mature audiences, so if you are basically squeamish or if you get really spooked easily, you may want to watch this one. Okay, I'm going to check it out though, but yeah, I'm just giving you that fair warning ahead of time. And if also, guys, your support to the channel is truly appreciated. All my subscribers who have stuck with me through the hell I have been going through this past year, and you've still been there to keep this channel going, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And of course, if you like the video, please hit the like button, okay? Because that's the only way I can help get this channel going and to keep it running, and how YouTube will find it to put it in the algorithm so everybody else can find it, okay? And hit that notification bell so you know when I post these videos up. And without any more gum bumping, let's get into this.
Today's video is a classic scary story. It's about a group of people in Scotland who go into this infamous cemetery in the middle of the night, and they encounter something very bizarre. Amazingly, they actually manage to get a photo of it. And so if you stick around till the end of this video, you will see that photo. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please ask the like button if you can quickly use their cell phone to just make a quick call to your parents.
I love when he does that.
And as soon as they hand it over, immediately factory reset it and throw it off a cliff.
Damn.
Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
I always love that theme. I got me some jalapeno chips to enjoy with this video and some Clearly Canadian. 1,000 tortured souls. Damn.
Late one night in November of 1999, a 66-year-old minister named Colin Grant opened up the iron gates of a cemetery called Greyfriars Kirkyard. This cemetery was one of the oldest and most famous cemeteries in Edinburgh, Scotland. Now, the cemetery was basically pitch black. However, there were a few old iron lanterns that lined
I've heard of this cemetery.
that cut through the cemetery.
Thanks
So
to Ghost
Colin
Adventures.
pushed open these big gates and he stepped onto this path and he began walking. And on either side of him, for as far as he could see, were all these headstones, some of which dated back to the 1600s. And as he kept walking, he could see up ahead, even in the darkness, the huge Gothic-style church that sat right in the center of the cemetery. Now, at first glance, this cemetery just kind of looked like a pretty typical old cemetery, albeit a pretty spooky one. But to Colin, he knew there was far more than just a graveyard here. Deep underground in the cemetery, below where all the people have been buried at their headstones, was basically another cemetery. There was like this mass burial pit that the cemetery had been built on top of. And in this lower level cemetery, which in no way was marked, I mean, this is basically a hidden mass burial, were thousands of people who had been starved and tortured to death hundreds of years ago. And so Colin stopped for a second on the path and just kind of stared ahead of this church. And for a second, he thought about just turning and leaving because he did not want to be here.
I damn sure would have. Hell, I wouldn't have went in.
Begged him to come here. Colin, in addition to being a minister, claimed to be a psychic, which meant he could speak to the dead. And so the city, in desperation, had asked him to come to this cemetery tonight and perform an exorcism. And so as much as Colin did just want to turn around and leave, he knew he really had a duty here, not just to the city, but really to the people of the city. Because if he didn't do this exorcism, there was a good chance more people were going to get hurt. The only thing that was making Colin a little bit less afraid in this moment was he actually was not alone in the cemetery. There were two people with him. There was a journalist and a photographer from a local newspaper who were basically tagging along to document this exorcism. And so after taking a minute to compose himself, Colin continued walking deeper into the cemetery with these two following behind him. And then before reaching the big church, Colin left the path and began cutting through the grass, passing by different headstones, on the way to perhaps the most infamous building in the entire cemetery, the Black Mausoleum.
Damn.
The Black Mausoleum was
What
this
lights
tall
are those?
stone crypt with a rounded top.
Are those
that had been
apartments?
built sometime in the late 1600s. And as
Oh,
Colin
hell no.
got
I couldn't
closer
live
to
next to
this
no
pretty
damn
creepy looking
cemetery.
building that sat basically on the side of the cemetery, Colin began to feel this really intense sense of dread come over him. And the closer he got, that dread began to kind of manifest itself in like a pit in his stomach. And eventually he began feeling really scared of this building. And eventually Colin actually had to fully stop about 10 or so feet away from
that red sky in that photo
he
was
just felt like
crazy.
he couldn't go any closer. It felt evil. And then Colin turned and looked at his companions, the journalist and photographer, to see if maybe they were reacting to this mausoleum. But the two of them were just standing there with blank expressions on their face, like obviously not thinking that anything sinister was happening here. You know, even though the city had asked the minister to be here to perform this exorcism in this mausoleum, you know, it didn't mean everybody believed what was going on here. And clearly these two didn't. They were totally skeptical. But this didn't offend Colin. He was used to people not believing in the things he believed in. And he knew as soon as he actually began his work, you know, doing this exorcism, they would change their mind.
Yeah.
And so at some point, Colin told the photographer,
That's why he's
hey,
feeling
you know,
things, because he's
gonna go in the mausoleum
done this
because I
before.
have to do the exorcism. Before I do, take a picture of the mausoleum. And so the photographer just raised her camera and took a picture of the mausoleum. Colin thanked her, and then he turned and began walking towards the building. When he got right in front of it, he looked up and he read the name across the top of the crypt. And it said George Mackenzie. And as Colin read that, he could feel his heart rate start to spike. So back in the late 1600s,
Definitely remember this
George
from Ghost
Mackenzie was a
Adventures.
Scottish lord,
Ghost
who worked
Adventures.
for the
Oh
King
my
of
God.
England, enforcing the king's religious laws. But at the time, these laws were very unpopular. And there was one group called the Covenanters who hated these laws so much that they actually mounted a full-scale rebellion in 1679. But their rebellion failed miserably, and this is when George Mackenzie came in. He captured over 1,000 Covenanters, and he marched them all into this huge field, which would later become the Greyfriars Kirkyard Cemetery. But
There
at
it
the
is.
time, it was just a big open field. And he held them there, and for weeks, he had these people starved and tortured and mutilated. And if anybody tried to run or resist, because they knew they were doomed, I mean, they all knew they were going to die here. If anybody took off, he would capture them, cut their head off, and then place their head on a spike around the perimeter of this field.
Sorry if I keep jumping up talking about Ghost Adventures in it, but yeah, I used to be a hardcore fan of that series back in the day, and I remember when they investigated Greyfriars Cemetery, and yeah, it was crazy.
Until, after several weeks, the entire field is just ringed with decaying bodies and bloody heads on spikes. And so, after a few months of this, basically everybody in that field had been murdered in some horrible way by George Mackenzie. And their bodies were all dumped into a mass grave in Greyfriars Kirkyard, then covered over, and then, hundreds of years later, a proper cemetery would be built right on top of that mass grave. And then, when George Mackenzie died later on, I mean, he lived a normal, happy, full life after doing all these horrible things. They built him this beautiful mausoleum in Greyfriars Kirkyard. And so here's this horrible person, George Mackenzie, who's a mass murderer, and he's put to rest in this beautiful mausoleum, just, feet away from this mass grave of all these people he killed. For almost 300 years after Mackenzie was buried, Greyfriars Kirkyard was quiet. It was not considered a haunted place. That all changed, though, in 1998, so that was 1 year before Colin showed up to perform this exorcism. That year, in 1998, a homeless man broke into the Black
Yeah.
Mausoleum, and he fell through the floor and landed in one of those mass burial pits of those people Mackenzie had killed. And apparently, basically right after this happened, visitors to the cemetery began reporting the same thing. That anytime they were in or near the Black Mausoleum, they'd get pushed or tugged on or scratched or burned or even strangled. I mean, people were coming out of the cemetery terrified. And so quickly, people in town began to speculate about, what was going on in the cemetery. And quickly, a story began to circulate around town that maybe when that guy fell through the floor in the mausoleum, that had released George Mackenzie's evil spirit, and his spirit was responsible for all these attacks.
Now, yeah, what I understood when I watched this, they talked about it on Ghost Adventures. When he fell through, they said he fell through. If I remember right, it was on like, he landed on like a pile of like bones and old corpses and like he's saying, they didn't get into detail about how all that was happening, like the attacks and everything. They just made mention of that, but he was telling that could have been that when he did that, it could have released that evil.
So it went on like this for about a year until finally this young woman was found outside of the Black Mausoleum, unconscious, looking like she'd been strangled. And when she came to, she had no memory of what happened. And so people assumed this had to be another attack by the spirit of George Mackenzie. And so by this point, the city was totally fed up with this. They didn't know what to do. And so they said, you know what? Let's just try an exorcism. Let's have someone go into that mausoleum and literally confront the spirit of George Mackenzie and banish him. Get him out of here and stop this madness. And so ultimately, Colin was hired to perform this exorcism. As Colin stood there, reading the name George Mackenzie and mentally preparing himself to go inside of this horrible place, he realized he just couldn't do it. This was too much. And so Colin is just standing there feeling totally stressed out. He's embarrassed. He feels like a coward. He has no idea what he's going to say to the photographer and journalist who've literally come out here to document what he's going to do, and now he's not going to do it. But as Colin turned around to basically blurt out this really embarrassing news that, hey guys, we got to leave, he realized he actually knew something else he could do that in many ways might actually be better than going into this mausoleum and doing an exorcism. And so without saying anything,
Yeah,
Colin
leave.
just turned and began speed walking over to this big field that was not too far away from the Black Mausoleum. And when he got there, he just began chanting prayers and walking in circles, flicking holy water. Didn't explain anything he was doing to the journalist and the photographer who'd followed him over there and are just watching him like, what's going on here? They got no idea. He's not clarifying. And for hours, this is what he did. He just kind of paced in this field, just kind of doing what looked like stereotypical, exorcism type behavior. And that's what the journalist and the photographer assumed he was doing. And so as Colin did whatever he was doing in this field, the photographer, whose name was Susan Burrell, just began doing her job. Again, thinking that he was doing the exorcism.
Started
She
taking
just started
pictures.
taking pictures of him. And then finally, around 2 a.m., so again, this has been hours of Colin doing this thing he's doing. Colin just abruptly stops and walks over to Susan and the journalist, and Colin looks horrible. He's totally haggard, his hair's all disheveled, he's sweating, he's pale, and his head is down, and he says to the two women, "I failed." He explained to them that his original intention was to go into the Black Mausoleum and confront George Mackenzie's spirit head on and banish him from the cemetery. However, he had had a change of heart at the door and decided to go this other route, which was to go to this big open field in the middle of the cemetery and attempt to free the spirits of all those Covenanters who had been tortured and killed by George Mackenzie. Colin's thinking was, if I can free all of these poor tortured souls, that maybe once they're gone, George Mackenzie's spirit will also go away. And while, according to Colin, he was able to free, 200 some odd trapped souls, he said there were many more that still needed to be freed, and he just didn't have the strength. Like, he couldn't do this right now. And so he said, I have to rest and do this at another time. Now, the journalist and the photographer were totally over this and did not care at all. It's 2 a.m. They don't really understand what he was doing. They don't really know if this was the exorcism or if it was something else. But to them, they're like, okay, fine, we'll get out of here. It's late. It's not a big deal. And so the three of them, they began walking out of the cemetery. And right when they got in front of the church, so basically between where the Black Mausoleum was and where that field was, where Colin had been for the past several hours, Colin abruptly stopped. And he told the journalist and the photographer that actually, you know what? He had a little strength left, and he felt like it was his duty to try this again because he knew he could free more souls, and so he was going to give it another go. And so the journalist and the photographer are like, okay. And so Colin, he gets out his Bible and he begins kind of doing the same thing he was doing out in the field, walking around, chanting Bible verses, spraying holy water all around. And then at some point, for reasons he did not explain to either Susan or the journalist, he pulled out 12 candles from his backpack that he had brought along, and he put them in a circle on the ground right in front of this church. It also encompassed this big Celtic cross that was on the ground. And Colin was inside of the circle, and he lit all these candles, and the whole time, again, he's chanting out these Bible verses, and he stands up, and right after all the candles have been lit, suddenly, Susan and the journalist noticed that the candles begin to flicker. And it's not windy at all inside the cemetery. Like, they shouldn't be flickering. And at the same time, Colin seemed to sense that something was happening around him, and he turned his whole body, his whole presence, and he looked over at the Black Mausoleum and began chanting these Bible verses louder and louder, like he was aiming them at the Black Mausoleum. And as he was doing this, the candles were flickering more and more and more. And at some point, Colin actually picked up one of these candles and kind of held it out at the Black Mausoleum. And so at this point, the journalist and the photographer, Susan, they're sensing that something weird is happening here. Like, this is spooky, what they're seeing. Like, why are the candles flickering? What's going on with Colin? Like, what's happening here? And for a minute, the two of them kind of abandoned their actual job, which is to document what they're seeing.
They're just thrown off. They're just shocked.
This totally bizarre event. But then Susan sort of broke out of it. She lifted up her camera, and right as Colin is passionately chanting out these verses, she takes a picture of him, and the second she does, the flash lights up the cemetery, and then after the flash goes away, Colin, it was like the light went out on him, and he just crumpled to the ground. And so the journalist immediately ran over to Colin to see if he was okay, and Colin, who's like barely conscious at this point, he just kept repeating, "This is going to kill me. This is going to kill me." And so Susan was about to run over and join her colleague and make sure Colin was okay. But before she did, she glanced down at her camera to see the picture she had taken of Colin right before he collapsed. And as she glanced at it, she couldn't believe what she was looking at. At first she thought, maybe this is some trick of the light, like this can't be right. But then she zoomed in on the photo, and when she looked closely, she screamed. Here's the photograph that Susan took. As you can see, Colin the minister is standing there with the candle.
The shadow in the window.
And behind him is the big church. And on the church, on the left side, there are windows. Now, this church was locked up. Nobody was inside the church at the time. But you can clearly see in the left window, there is a figure in that window looking out at Colin. Now, of course, this is not evidence enough to make everybody believe that, that must be
the shadow.
Mackenzie's spirit staring out at Colin. He's the reason Colin collapsed. But I'll tell you, this photograph is not the end of the story. Remember, after Colin collapsed to the ground after this photo was taken, the journalist ran over, and all Colin kept saying was, "This is gonna kill me, this is gonna kill me." Well, it would turn out he'd be right. Not long after this failed exorcism, Colin would die inexplicably. His death would come as a total shock to his friends and family.
Oh my
No one
God.
has ever been able to debunk the photo that Susan took that showed that dark figure in the window of the church, meaning nobody knows what that was. The church really was supposed to be empty and locked, and so how is there somebody or something in the window? Nobody knows. A lot of people think that could be the evil spirit of George Mackenzie, striking Colin down, and Susan managed to capture it on film. But, it's up to you if you believe that or not. But I will say, to this day, people go into that cemetery and come out with scratch marks on them and, claiming they were pushed or pulled or strangled. And so that cemetery is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the world. And George Mackenzie's spirit, who supposedly haunts it, is considered to be one of the most dangerous poltergeists in the world as well. Before I became a professional, strange, dark, and mysterious storyteller, I served in the military. And during my time in the military, I had some pretty wild experiences. But what I remember most about my time in service was not my own stories, but rather the stories I heard from other service members. Keep in mind, service members are sent to some of the most isolated and treacherous places in the world that very few people go to. And so some of the stories that come out of those places are totally creepy and weird. And even more than that, a lot of these stories sort of stay in-house. They stay in the military just because it's kind of a cultural thing. People don't necessarily want to go out and tell the world about the totally unsettling and inexplicable thing they saw while they were deployed. It's like people might think they were crazy. But there's lots of stories like that. And so if hearing some of those crazy military stories appeals to you, well, boy, do I have a podcast for you. It's called Wartime Stories, and it's hosted by Luke LaManna, who himself is a veteran. He was a reconnaissance Marine, which I can tell you is kind of a big deal. And so because he has access and placement, he's been able to extract some of these stories from the military, and he shares them on the show. And if you wanted to kind of generalize the types of stories you're going to hear on this podcast, it's like the strange, dark, and mysterious meets the battlefield and beyond. The Wartime Stories podcast is free, and it's available on any podcast platform. So all you have to do is, go to your favorite platform and look up Wartime Stories, or you can search for Ballen Studios because it's produced by
I may have to check that out.
You click on the show, give it a follow, and boom, you can start your binge. New episodes drop every Monday, so if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, well, you got yourself a brand new weekly show. So that's going to do it. If you enjoyed today's stories and you're looking for more strange, dark, and mysterious content, well, you're in luck because we have a whole slew of strange, dark, and mysterious podcasts under the Ballen Studios umbrella. We have the Mr. Ballen podcast, Mr. Ballen's Medical Mysteries. We have Wartime Stories, Bedtime Stories. We got Run Fool.
Run Fool.
You got to go check them out. Go to any podcast platform.
Hey, y'all didn't check that Run Fool out. I may.
Boom, you'll see all our podcasts.
I'll be damned if I'm going to go listen to some bedtime stories.
To binge right now. Thank you so much for the support. Until next time, see ya. Today's video.
All right, guys. Yeah, they never talked about that on Ghost Adventures. Oh, man. That is crazy. He sat out there and said, "This is going to kill me," and it did. See, man, there's another part of our world that people just don't understand, and you shouldn't, you got to be careful with it. So what y'all think of that story? Wow, it kind of frailed my nerves. Wow, but yeah, like I said, I learned about that originally on an episode of Ghost Adventures, and they didn't go into that much detail about like that. I mean, that was just crazy. Oh my gosh. But what do you guys think? Oh man, I damn sure wouldn't go into that place. I damn sure would not be. I don't fool with that kind of stuff. And I've had friends that have asked me to do things like that. Yeah, Brandy, I'm talking about you. And they it's not something I'm not playing with that. I'm not dragging something back out no. No, I got enough going on in my life. Okay. But anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. And a huge shout out to Mr. Ballen. You guys go check out his channel. I'll make sure his channel is in the description so you can go check him out. Show this guy some love. He does amazing videos. And as always, guys, I thank you all for being here. I will see you all in the next video. As also, please support your brother. Hit that like button. Please hit that like button. It would mean the world to me. And make sure you're still, if you're a subscriber and you know you're supposed to be subscribed, check it, because YouTube is removing subscribers from people's accounts. Okay, you guys need to follow up on that. Okay, make sure you're still subscribed. All right, but as always, much love to all of you. Thank you for being here, whether you're a regular or new. Thank you for your visiting my channel. Thank you for your support. Until next time, you all stay blessed and have a great night. I'm out.